Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Hunter Ohanian. I'm the director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we're very happy to have everybody here. Welcome to episode number 22 of our COVID virtual series, and we're very grateful to have everybody who's been participating in this. It's been one of the few things, few positive things that COVID has taught us, which is how we can actually reach out to bigger communities out there. And for Stonewall, I think reaching other parts of the LGBTQ community is really very important. So just a few things, a few announcements. First of all, if you've not been to our website, that's kind of the hub in this period of time that we want everybody to go to. And so it's stonewall-museum.org. You can sign up there to receive announcements for these events. We hold these events every week. I will be speaking with tonight's panelists between now 6:30 and 7:30. And usually what we do is we have the conversation for the first 45 minutes, and then we have a section at the end for questions. So if you have a question, throw it into the chat or into the Q&A area, and then we'll be processing those questions as we go through. This talk will also be archived both on our Facebook page, and for those of you who are joining us live on Facebook, hello, nice to see you. And then also give us about a week and it will be posted up on the Stonewall website. Also, if you're here in South Florida, just remember to come by the Stonewall National Museum and Archives. We're located at 1300 East Sunrise. We have two exhibitions up. One, which is, of course, very topical, called Elected Sisters. It explores the first lesbian, bi, and trans open individuals who were elected to public office in the United States. And all of that information is drawn from our archives. If you're interested in seeing the exhibition online, if you go again to the website, you'll find virtual exhibitions, and you can see all the objects in the wall text there. In addition, we have an exhibition up right now called Life Letters, which again are coming from our archives, and it's expressions of love and support between members of the LGBTQ community, either between partners or an individual and their parents or ex-partners, or there's like this really amazing thing between somebody performing in a jewel box review at the Apollo Theater in Harlem in 1969, and you can read these amazing original telegrams from their mother and grandparents, just telling them how much they loved them and how proud that they were of the work that they were doing at the time. So that exhibition is called Life Letters. And if you're here, you can see it here, or of course you can see it on our website as well. And so I always like to do a shout out to my colleague, Emery Grant. Emery, show yourself. He's here in the back. There's Emery. Hello, Emery. Emery is our deputy director, and he's the one behind the scenes here, trying to help us make sure that everything happens very smoothly. So tonight's conversation is really about a report which came out from MAP this past summer. And it really spoke to the queer community in the southeastern United States. I think I saw it either in June or July. And I thought that's really interesting. And I loved the fact that this research had actually been done, particularly for Stonewall, because even though we are a national organization and we're involved all over the US, the focus of our holdings is really in the southeastern United States. So we consider our territory to be anything east of Houston, Texas, and anything south of Washington, D.C., even though we cover the United States. And there are many great queer archives out there, and I urge you to go to them and understand where they are in your local area, because it's very important to know that these archives are here. Let me just do, before we get going, my first question is really going to be for you, Logan, but maybe just so everybody knows who's here on the call. Logan, let's start with you. Can you just say hi and give us just a very quick bio?
Sure. Yeah. My name's Logan Casey. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a policy researcher for the Movement Advancement Project. I grew up in St. Louis and spent almost a decade in Michigan at graduate school, and have been working for MAP for 2.5 years now. I'm a queer and transgender man, and just really, really excited and honored to get to be here and lift up the work that Ivy and Zakia are going to talk about.
We're so pleased and privileged to have you here. Um, uh, Zakia from Richmond.
Yes, good evening, and I am so honored to be included in this panel this evening. I am Zakia McKensey, and I'm the Executive Director and founder of Nationz Foundation. Nationz is the first Black trans-led organization in Central Virginia. We provide free STI and HIV testing, as well as a lot of wraparound support services for folks who identify as LGBTQ with a specific focus on trans women of color. I have a background of working in the nonprofit sector for about 10 years for an amazing organization, which was then called Fan Free Clinic, which is now Health Brigade. And I left there and went to work for Richmond City Health District for about 6 years before I launched Nationz Foundation. And I am also happy to be a facilitator for the Trans Justice Funding Project as well. I'm happy to be.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Ivy?
It is raining here, so that is just happening, so you know. But hi, my name's Ivy, and I use they, them pronouns. I'm a huge fan of Zakia's, actually. I don't think she knows that, but I'm really excited to finally get to meet you over Zoom while this is happening, too. So I'm a co-founder and the executive director of a grassroots organization based in Piedmont, South Carolina called Genderbenders. And then also serve as the community health program director with the Campaign for Southern Equality. We started Genderbenders in 2011, just as three friends kind of talking about what needs we have as trans folks in upstate South Carolina at the time, which is now the southeastern US that we serve. And from that, just kind of developed this three-prong approach to serving the trans community. The first leg of that is connecting folks to the resources they need to lead full and healthy lives. The second leg of that is engaging in education and advocacy work to help make safer spaces for our folks. And the third, maybe most important piece of what we do is just create intentional space for folks to build peer support networks with other trans Southerners. So anyway, really excited to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, Ivy, it's great. And you know, for me, it's really it's wonderful to be part of this and actually to have such a diverse panel here. And I just want to thank you all for being here and being part of it and actually allowing us to create the space for these conversations to happen. All right, Logan, I'm going to go to you first. And I think just to set this up a little bit, just give us a little more about MAP. I know you guys are located in Boulder, Colorado. You get a lot of good funding. How long has the organization been around? What's its core mission? How many employees do you have?
Mm-hmm.
What's the best thing you do? What's what the organization does? What does it want to do better? Just give us some sense about the organization before we actually get into the report.
Sure. Yeah, MAP was founded in 2006, and yeah, on paper we're in Boulder, Colorado, but all of us are a fully remote team and have been even before COVID. So we have, I think we have 8 or 9 full-time staff, and even that is a growth from recent years. And we are almost every one of us is in a different state, so we're really covering the country a little bit there with our small but mighty team. MAP is a nonprofit think tank, and we work on advancing equality for all, including and mainly focused on LGBTQ people and communities. We have a team focused on messaging research and a team focused on policy work, and that's what I do, and that's where the report that we're talking about tonight came from.
Great. Zakia, just tell us a tad more about Nationz Foundation.
Sure. So our mission is to provide education and information related to HIV prevention and overall health and wellness. while inspiring the community to take responsibility for their health and work towards a more inclusive Virginia for LGBTQIA+ folks. So as I said, we do free HIV testing, STI testing, linkage to care. We have a food pantry in our office. We have 2 mobile testing units that are mobile food pantries as well. We just recently purchased a house in February that is our Aim to Inspire house, which is specifically for trans individuals who are homeless and don't have housing. We also have our Aim to Inspire program that does emergency housing and utility assistance. And then we have several support groups, one for trans men, one for trans women, those for gender non-conforming individuals, and then we have one for folks living with HIV. And then also I've done a lot of work over the many years, and I'm most proud that this year our Virginia Values Act passed. So it gave protections for folks for LGBTQ in respect to housing, employment, public accommodations, credit. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done in Virginia and the strides that we've made for our community.
Yeah, that's great. And Ivy, just dig in a tad more for us about the Campaign for Southern Equality.
Sure. The Campaign for Southern Equality is the other organization that I didn't talk quite as much about when I was doing my intro that I work for. So we're also a grassroots organization, but we're based in Asheville, North Carolina. And our mission is to advocate for full, legal, and lived equality for all LGBTQ folks in the South. So that looks like a lot of different things. My role with the campaign is Community Health Program Director. So a lot of what I do is trainings for medical providers around trans sensitivity and trans competency. I also run some pop-up clinics, connecting folks with stuff like HIV testing or assistance with legal name changes. We've even done some self-defense clinics that are run by and for trans folks specifically. With that, I also maintain the Trans in the South resource guide, which we're working on the next update to. Right now, it includes 400 service providers across 13 Southern states. We expect it'll probably double with this next update, which is really exciting to see. So I don't know, we do a lot of things. I could, try to rack my brains. Oh, we do some research projects like the one that we're here talking about tonight. Let's not forget about that. So anyway, yeah.
Good. All right, so Logan, back to you. Logan, so telling a new Southern story, LGBTQ resilience, resistance, and leadership. That's actually what caught my eye in this whole thing. And so what I'd like you to focus on as you introduce this topic, and Emery, if you can, there's a great PDF, or there's several PDFs. There's an executive summary and the full report. But if you can begin to start sharing some of those so people have them. But Logan, talk to us about how this report started. Why was it important? I won't ask you yet about, I will in a moment, but I won't ask you yet about what the results were, but give us some background as to why this was important.
Yeah, absolutely. At MAP, some of the work, a big focus of the work that we do is trying to bring, to broaden public understanding of LGBTQ people and communities and our experiences. And for us, a big focus and priority in that work is to elevate and center the experiences of folks in our community that are often left out of mainstream conversations. And so we've done a long series on LGBTQ folks in rural parts of the country. We do a lot of work on LGBTQ people of color and transgender people. And so this work is really just another example of that focus for us, of really trying to center the stories and experiences and leadership of people in our community that are often left out of the mainstream conversations about LGBTQ folks and our experiences. I can stop there. That was really the focus for us.
Yeah, and so what's interesting is that so as I look at this very substantive report, how long has the research been in place to actually get us where we are today to see this report that came out this summer?
I think a lot of the research that went into this report also came out of the work we did in our previous series on LGBTQ people in rural America. So in that sense, it's been probably 2.5 years in the making. Um, a long series of interview processes and research and so on.
And talk to me a little bit about why rural, by specifically looking at rural communities. It sounds as if you're making a distinction between rural communities and urban communities. And I know the answer to this question, but I just want to hear you sort of speak about why was it important to look at rural communities, or better said, maybe why was it important to look at non-urban communities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. So there's mainstream narratives and pop culture portrayals about LGBTQ people often focus on white gay people who are in big cities on the coast in particular. But what the data actually show us is that the majority of LGBTQ people live in the South and in the Midwest, and a good portion of the community lives in rural areas. We estimate in that rural series that anywhere from 3 to 4 million LGBTQ people live in rural parts of the country. And what we show in the Southern report is that using data from the Williams Institute and our friends and colleagues there, that more LGBTQ people live in the South specifically than any other part of the country. And so we are really wanting to sort of call attention to this assumption that many people, including within the queer community, have, that most LGBTQ people live in big cities and on the coast, when in reality, that's not at all the case. And it would do us all a lot of good to assess our assumptions about that and rethink our mental images about particularly people who don't live in the South, for us to reassess our assumptions about who queer people are and where we live and what our experiences are.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And it's so great to hear you put it in that context. Again, before we get to the findings of the report, do you have any sense as to why such a greater percentage of queer, trans, and LGBTQ people don't actually live in the high-profile urban areas, but live in rural areas? Any reason why?
Well, I think our other panelists will be able to speak to this too, but just off the cuff, I would say, one of the things about being an LGBTQ person is that we're born into lots of different families. Not to engage in a born this way narrative, but like we come from all different kinds of families all across the country, and it including in rural areas, including in the South and the Midwest and all over the country. And not everybody wants to live in a big city or on the coast. So this is, again, is that sort of narrative of like people who, like myself, coming from Missouri, that the assumption is that at some point in my life, I'm going to want to move to New York or San Francisco to get out of the middle, the flyover country, right? Or for folks who grew up in rural areas, that they want to get out of there and get to the big city, whatever that means. But in reality, lots of people who are from the Midwest or the South, like I love the Midwest. I want to be in the Midwest, and many Southerners want to be in the South, and that's where their families are. That's who they are. And a lot of research about queer people in rural areas, including in the South, shows that their experiences and their identity or sense of self as someone from a rural area or from a region of the country can be just as important to who they are and how they think of themselves as being queer.
That's great. That's a great response. So Ivy and Zakia, do you want to respond to that question about the whole idea of why rural areas might be popular for members of the queer community?
I actually think Logan hit it on the head, that folks just kind of want to live where they want to live. People have asked me for a long time, why have I stayed in Virginia? And one, I love Virginia. I love where it's located. We've had some issues and some strides throughout the years.
Who hasn't had issues and strides?
but for me, it was that, you know, I love my state, I love my city. So it was for me to be home to make change for my people so that people that come after me will have the freedoms and will have the equality and access to the things that we deserve as LGBTQ people. And the South is beautiful. Like Virginia, we get all the seasons and, you know, so it's just beautiful here. So I think a lot of, you know, like Logan said, a lot of it's connection to family, being in a familiar place, and everybody doesn't want to live in a big city. I like to travel to Atlanta. I like to travel to New York. But when I come home and I smell fresh air and not a lot of traffic, you know, that's like perfect for me. So it's more about just staying connected where I am and making sure that I was making a difference in my city and my state where I live.
It's really interesting and sort of very exhilarating to hear you say that, in the sense that is really about the personal experience. That the LGBTQ part is not really important. It's just whoever you are as an individual, you want to live where you feel comfortable, as opposed to where you're supposed to feel comfortable,
Right.
or supposed to be part of. You just want to be part of it. Ivy, do you want to chime in on this topic at all?
Sure. I mean, I could just echo a lot of what Logan and Zakia said. You know, if I had to pick probably my top 3 words to describe myself, it'd be trans, queer, and Southern. And I'm not trying to leave the South. You know, I like to fish and be in the woods, and Piedmont, the town that I live in, is a really small country town, and I love it here. So I think there's like has already kind of been mentioned, I think that there's this really popular narrative that to be from the South, to live in a rural town, means that you're miserable if you're a trans and queer person. And that just does not ring true with my experience. And then also, you know, this is where my family is. Like Logan was saying, people are born into different families in different areas. And so this is home for me, and I don't want to go anywhere. You know?
That's great, great. So Logan, let's go back to the report. So if you could give us some bullet points of the findings of the report.
Sure.
I have the executive summary here up on my screen here. I can't share it, but I have it here on my computer. But kind of walk us through some of the findings of the report.
Yeah, and I have a little PowerPoint for some visuals if it's helpful.
You just happen to have a PowerPoint in your pocket.
I'm a visual learner, so I like to have visuals when I talk. But again, just thank you so much for having us here.
Sure,
We already talked about some of this, but yeah, the report came out in July of this year. MAP and the Campaign for Southern Equality, along with our partners at the Equality Federation, put this out in July. And the main areas that we cover in the report, and there's a lot more detail in the report itself, so I encourage listeners to check it out in detail. But the main areas that we cover are quickly just, you know, what is the South? Even, you know, Southerners themselves disagree about what exactly is the South, but really trying to get into this conception of who's in the South, and revisiting our perceptions and often misperceptions about who lives in the South. And then we talk about LGBTQ life specifically in the South along these different areas of our day-to-day experiences, including economic insecurity, health and well-being, and daily life. And then we turn to LGBTQ politics, which is really where a large focus of the report rests, trying to illustrate this point that, well, I'll get into it in a second. And then finally, we close with how to support and elevate the work that LGBTQ Southerners are already doing, not for folks outside the region to swoop in and parachute in and do something different, but to elevate the work that's already being done there by folks who actually live there. And so the main point that I want to talk about for each one of these, I'll just do one point for each. First is just when we think about the South, as I've mentioned already, more LGBTQ people live in the South than in any other region of the country. Again, that data from our friends at the Williams Institute show that about 1 in 3 LGBTQ people across the country live in the South, and that's more than any other region. So again, pushing back on this narrative that most queer people live in on the coast. But another thing that's unique about the South is that Southern LGBTQ Southerners, in the report we call this, we facing a perfect storm of vulnerability to discrimination. And I think it's really important to stop for a second and focus on this idea that or call attention to the idea that discrimination is not unique to the South. It happens all across the country, including in states and regions with better policies for LGBTQ people. And it's not, we're not trying to make the argument that the South is somehow, people in the South are somehow uniquely prejudiced or anything against LGBTQ people, but rather that there are a number of structural issues that all sort of work together to make LGBTQ Southerners particularly vulnerable to discrimination when it does happen. And so some of those, yeah, go ahead.
So let me hop in here. So do you think part of what this concept is about is that so much of the narrative is controlled by the coast, as you say, whether it's media or art or other things, and that those of us that may be kind of big city focused, that we're wrong in our perception because we may be making a decision that the South in general is going to be more discriminatory than Brooklyn or Boston or San Francisco or Los Angeles. And do we have to look at ourselves to say, wait a minute, we're judging the South in an unfair way?
It's a good question. I think it's some of all of the above, really. I think what we try to argue in the report is that there are structural issues that make queer people in the South vulnerable to discrimination. Those structural issues are relative to other parts of the country. And so just to get through a few of them, it's the fact that there are at a state level, the fewest policy protections for LGBTQ people against discrimination, the most number of harmful and discriminatory laws, and particularly religious exemption laws. I'm going to leave this presentation so we can just talk to each other. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I mean, I think what we try to argue in the report is that we being me as a non-Southerner, but have been Southern adjacent, and my family is from Southern Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky area. But even still, we having these sort of perceptions about the South as this place that is particularly hostile at a political policy level. And in the report, we show many different ways by which that is true, right? That the South has the fewest number of positive protections, a high number of discriminatory, harmful laws. But despite that, and maybe even because of that political or policy reality, queer and trans people in the South have been extraordinarily innovative and effective in meeting their own needs, going around government entirely, and taking care of one another. And so when we think about like someone in Brooklyn thinking about whether, they're looking down on the South, I mean, I think that's certainly a thing that many of us have been guilty of and may continue to be guilty of in the future. But the point of the report to me is to say, like, let's acknowledge that there are these misconceptions that people within the community, within the queer community, and outside of the queer community have about the South and what experiences are for LGBTQ people there. And instead say, well, wait a minute, look at all the incredible work that's being done there by queer and trans people who are choosing to live there, choosing to fight there, and the amazing work that they're doing to take care of one another and make cultural and political change. What can we learn from that, right? Like, I'm from Missouri, a very red state. I think in this past legislative session, the highest number of anti-LGBTQ bills that were introduced into session of any state in the country. What can we learn from the incredible work that folks in Georgia and Mississippi and Florida are doing? And in Virginia, the incredible work and successes that were done this year that reflected many, many years of work on the ground. What can we learn in Missouri, in Idaho, and other parts of the country?
Ivy, what are you thinking about when you hear all this? How much of this resonates with you about your experience?
All of it.
Nice.
Yeah, no, I mean, all of it really resonates, and thinking about the stories that we've heard and some of the grassroots leaders that I've gotten to work with in my roles with both organizations. I get to work with some really incredible folks across the South. I see that really innovative leadership coming out of the South, whether it's around health work and HIV education and prevention, or if it's peer support, or if it's you know, getting legal resources to folks when we really need it. I just, I mean, I think about like what started the Trans in the South Guide in the first place. We had this conference at the Campaign for Southern Equality, and I was leading a session on resources for trans folks. So this was before the Trans in the South Guide. There wasn't really a whole lot that was out there at the time, and the room was full of trans folks. And what ended up happening was not anything that I had planned to present on, but people just started, like, we created a safe space for people to connect with each other. And then people started saying, you know what, I really need a doctor, and I'm from rural North Carolina. And somebody else would say, hey, this is who I saw for that. And then that just happened across the room, that sort of magic, the way that folks show up for each other and provide for each other. I just have seen that happen so many different times. But that was the one that came to the top for me when I was just sitting here thinking about really the magic that is trans and queer Southern leadership, and the way that I've seen that look in our work and in so many other folks' work.
Zakia, how does it relate to you in Virginia?
I totally echo what was said, and even in the work that we do at Nationz, it is outside of the box stuff. It is to me very innovative and creative, but we have to come up with ways that are outside of the box so that we can meet the people that we need to meet and meet them where they are. So, you know, being in the South, especially in Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy, there is so much discrimination and racism and so much stuff going on here. But the work is important, and you know, I'm thankful that it's my charge to make change happen, but I'm now trying to inspire other people to get into the work, especially other trans women, so that the work will continue after I'm ready to retire.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that. So Logan, let's go back to you and hear a little bit more about the report. You can go back to the slideshow, or you can tell us some more salient points from the report.
Yeah, I think I can probably just talk through some of it. I mean, the major points that we make about the political climate, I started to get to earlier, that there are relatively few, and in fact, the fewest positive protections, the most number of religious exemptions and other harmful discriminatory laws. So at the state level, a policy level, very few protections, and in fact, a very hostile policy climate for LGBTQ folks. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the hostility in Southern legislatures toward people of color, toward voting, and all of those things that would that would affect LGBTQ Southerners' ability to make change in those sort of traditional political halls of government kinds of ways. But again, whether you think of it as despite that political environment or in fact because of it, LGBTQ Southerners, we argue and show in the report, are leading the way when it comes to organizing and advocacy. And in the report, we highlight 4 major themes that we looked at that are sort of unique to or particularly prevalent in Southern queer and trans advocacy. And Ivy and Zakia can both speak to a lot of these elements, and in fact already have, but some of the things that we talk about are the ways that, and I should preface this by saying these different themes certainly happen in queer organizing across the country, but we see them especially frequently or with a heightened importance in Southern communities. So those themes are things like the importance of building community, and the ways that that happens in particular, like unique ways in the South. So like Ivy's work with Camp Gender Benders in particular, I think is just a really incredible example of that. And I'll let them talk about that a little more. We also highlight a lot about the focus in Southern queer and trans communities about direct aid and direct support and mutual aid. And a lot of what Zakia is talking about of just like, let's provide the healthcare directly to our community members, housing directly to our community members. And I think that's pretty prevalent across lots of Southern LGBTQ work, is that, you know, given the long and very established history of the federal government, especially, and including as well as state governments in the South, to put it bluntly, like fail to do anything to take care of queer and trans people, and especially people of color. queer and trans Southerners are just doing it for themselves and not expecting that to change anytime soon, right? And so just meeting the immediate needs, including through these sort of like networks that Ivy was describing about the Trans in the South resource guide. And we may not be able to provide medical care directly to one another, but we can communicate about what medical providers are affirming and supportive where you exactly live. And so that direct data mutual support, community building efforts. And then when it does come to changing policy, we also talk about how that sort of traditional political work often looks different in the South, particularly in terms of broader definitions of progress, and the importance of defensive work, beating back bad bills in Southern legislatures, which Southern LGBTQ communities are extraordinarily good at, just incredibly good at. And the heightened emphasis on coalition building and sort of a broader sense of what is an LGBTQ issue. So those are some of the different things we get into in the report. And again, I think that the rest of the queer community across the country outside of the South has just so much to learn from our friends and family in the South.
Yeah, that's really well said. Let me take a break here to say I'm Hunter Ohanian, the director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I'm very happy to speak with Logan Casey, Ivy Hill, and Zakia McKensey about the report from MAP about the LGBTQ community in the southeastern United States, which just came out this summer. And so we'll be, for those of you on Facebook or who are joining us on Zoom, we'll be posting lots of links for you to be able to see this, and the conversation will certainly continue here. So why are we at a point where we're talking about a part of so let's not talk about the US for a minute, but let's just talk about this amorphous shape of a community, which just happens to be the United States. And now we're talking about the idea that there's some portion of it that just happens to be the southeastern part of the United States that might have the most repressive laws toward some particular subgroup there. But yet people feel comfortable being in that space. They feel comfortable, of course, not all the time, but they're happy being there. I've heard ideas about family and community keeping people in those spaces. But what are the lessons that can be learned by other communities in the United States about what those of you, and particularly I'm thinking about you, Ivy, and you, Zakia, about what lessons are you getting living in a place that you love, but yet you know the government, city, local, or state might not be as friendly. So what's the resilience that you're getting from? What lessons do you want to give to other people in parts of the country who feel very frustrated by the experience and the situation that they're in?
I personally would say, even through that frustration, get out there and make change. And a lot of times when people think about change, they think about change on a grander scale, like, oh, I got to do something big, but it's not about doing anything big. It's about taking small steps and making change for one person, making a difference in one person's life. And if you've done that, then you've done something spectacular. But don't get frustrated. When one door closes, another one opens, and keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. Prime example, last year, I was at the Virginia General Assembly, and I was there going and speaking to delegates about the Virginia Values Act last year, and really talking to these Bible thumpers who were making decisions for my life, who had really, you could tell, no concern about what we were talking about and our rights at all. And then to sit there on the House floor and see them pass laws to protect a dog, because it was a dog here in Virginia that got burned, and they called it the Tommy Law. And so they passed the bill to protect dogs from being hurt. And then our bill came up and they shot our bill down. So I was teetotally frustrated. And I felt like, you know, I've been doing this thing for almost 20 years back and forth down here. And is it really worth it? You know what I'm saying? And it was, because it turned around and it passed this year with the same hard work and dedication and perseverance that we put into really being active about it and being visible and using your voice. So never get discouraged. Keep pushing forward. Love yourself enough to continue to fight and fight and fight until you get what you want and see change. And change is inevitable because, like I said, this is the capital of the Confederacy. And who would have ever thought, you know, that we would lead the charge for states in the South to pass the Virginia Values Act. So I hope that Virginia is an example that will trickle down to other states so that folks will see if conservative Virginia did it, then we should do it as well. And all lives matter.
Yeah, and just so everybody's aware, just give us a few minutes on the Virginia Values Act, just so that everybody's aware of it.
So the Virginia Values Act is now it protects LGBTQ individuals, but not only does it protect LGBTQ individuals, but it protects you in housing, public accommodations, in relation to credit. But it you know, it started off as a charge for us as a community, but it trickles up to everybody. So it supports Black people, it supports women, it supports veterans, it supports disabled folks. It just keeps people, gives everyone equal access and free from being discriminated against. So where it was a charge for LGBTQ people at the beginning, but LGBTQ people have made a difference for all people. So um, stay resilient, keep moving, don't get disgusted. You know, you're gonna take some punches, but in this work, it is a lot of disappointment sometimes, but it's also great when you have these major victories and it makes you see that the work is worthwhile, worth doing.
Ivy, talk to us a little bit about South Carolina and what it's like being there in a place which, as we've been describing, some of the laws might not be hospitable, but the community is certainly hospitable.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I could echo a lot of the same stuff that Logan and Zakia have already said. You know, we don't have a lot of legal protections, and we do have more structural barriers than folks who live in other parts of the country. We have less access to healthcare, all of that stuff. But the thing that happens, that I've seen happen again and again and again, is these grassroots leaders step up and fill those gaps. And we've learned how to become safety nets for each other. And I think that that has so much to do with why there's such strong coalition building in the South. And it's something that makes me very proud to be a trans organizer in South Carolina. There's some really incredible grassroots trans leadership across the state here. And we show up for each other and support each other in ways that I think is really beautiful, and definitely one of the things that I hope folks from other parts of the country can take from the South. I mean, it's born out of necessity. We've had to. I think that there's something different that happens when you have to really depend on each other for your survival. That really puts like pettiness or territorialism or other things like that can come into play into perspective. That's really not important, you know.
Yeah. And I have to like say that, you know, when you think about our community, when you think about LGBTQ communities as a whole, and you look at like polls and the depiction of the houses and how we come together to support one another, that is a way that our community has been resilient for years. We, you know, from being discriminated against and these houses and families, and when we're you know, ostracized from our real families, it's like we get to create new families, and those families support one another. And so that's like beautiful thing of our community, how we all can be in a struggle, but how we uplift and surround each other to build each other up.
Great. So Logan, I want to go back to you and sort of circle back around the report. And as I hear the three of you speak, I think, oh my God, why am I not watching this conversation on Rachel Maddow? Um, why am I not hearing the importance of what we're talking about? What has been, Logan, what has been the response to the report?
Well, I think the most responses that I've gotten personally have been through contacts and friends and colleagues in the South, like Ivy, like Zakia, folks that I got to meet while we were researching the report, and just um, I don't want this to come off as like humble brag. I'm sorry, but just a good reception and people seeming to be or sharing their thanks and gratitude for a report like this coming into play, which I think doesn't speak so much to like our specific report itself, but the lack of representation and the centering of queer and trans Southern voices in the broader discourse. And so I think it really speaks more to like the absence of this kind of discussion than anything else, and the need obviously for more conversations like this and the centering of voices like Ivy and Zakia's.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it feels like the statistics that you put out there as far as the community goes in the southeastern United States are really overwhelming. And it kind of smashes all of these preconceived notions that people have had about Northerners versus Southerners, liberals versus conservatives, living within in a loud society. I mean, all of these issues that come up, but yet not that acceptance in the mainstream media is the test, but it makes me want to know, why have we not heard more about this? Why are not more people understanding what is actually happening in the American Southwest?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of part of the broader conversation about representation in media in general, that and our misconceptions about what I'm trying to think how to say this. Um, and maybe Zakia or Ivy can add in here.
In my honest opinion, I feel like there are still so many personal biases about our community. And so I feel like
Let me stop you there. Let me stop. Personal biases about our community. Who are you speaking about specifically there?
when I say our community, LGBTQ people,
Okay.
trans people, all, everybody under the rainbow. And I think that, like, I think people just have so much negativity in their mind, and that they just don't really feel like it's their thing to have to deal with. Even when you look at like murders of trans women, right? The horrible ways that we are being killed. It's never highlighted on the news. You know what I'm saying? It's never any big to do about it. Even like Tony McDade, he got killed during the time of George Floyd, and that was just like swept under the rug, and it's just like the mindset of people, of straight people, and how they view us. And I feel like a lot of times that they kind of feel like this is what we get because of the lifestyle that we choose, instead of looking at us as human beings and amplifying the struggles that not only LGBTQ people face, but anybody, could face. And there are a lot of people who are homeless. There are a lot of people who are experiencing violence that aren't LGBTQ. But I just think it's personal biases against our community, and that's why these narratives or these stories are not amplified on a larger platform.
And that's really a good point that you made there too, because my sense is too is that we're talking about how the LGBTQ community is sort of protecting each other, but at the same token, my sense is that you and Ivy and Logan would be out there fighting for any other marginalized part of society, whether they were Black or homeless or women or whoever is not fully represented, you would want to make sure that those people were represented as well. Ivy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we cannot afford to take to have a siloed analysis of social justice. So all of these things are connected and intersectional and totally impact each other. So yeah, absolutely that, and definitely agree with everything that Zakia said about the South and why our stories aren't lifted up more. I mean, I think the other piece that I would add to it that I think impacts that is that the South is chronically underfunded. We talk about all of this really incredible grassroots work that's happening here and how it can be a model for organizers across the country, which I think is absolutely true. And the other thing is, like, most of these leaders, including myself for a long time, which is now not the case for me, but most of these folks who are doing this heroic work day in and day out are making nothing or almost nothing for all of that labor, physical, emotional, spiritual labor that goes into social justice work.
Yeah, no, they're not collecting 401ks, and they're not having their father buy a hotel someplace for them, or they're not, you know, all that stuff. Which brings me to a question that's come in from one of our visitors here. I'll read the question as it's posed, but yet I want to sort of change it slightly. So the question is, how much has the current administration, i.e. the president, stolen all the media attention and not allowing a proper agenda to go forward? So the question I would ask based upon that idea is, does it feel hard to break through the narratives that mainstream media are is placing out there for everybody right now? That these kind of stories can't break through because MSNBC and CNN and everybody else only wants to talk about, you know, that sort of higher level stuff, and they don't want to talk about what we're talking about right now? Does it feel like somebody's stolen the ability for people to actually get out there and have a conversation like this?
I kind of agree. I do agree. I had to think about that for a minute. But you know, I think that these producers and these news stations, you know, the news is the news. Somebody got killed. Somebody's going through something. It needs to be reported. So the news is the news. And just like I had a reporter to reach out to me yesterday to do a story about trans affirming practices within homeless shelters, because with the Virginia Values Act passing, we're still seeing that trans people are having issues going into homeless shelters, even after the law has passed. So she scheduled the interview with me, and then she was like, well, I'll let you know if we're going to run the story. And then she like emailed me back and was like, well, we're not going to do it today, but I'll reach out to you Thursday. And I was like, well, if my schedule allows, I'll let you know. But it's that kind of mentality. I think it's, you know, these people who have the seats of power that are making these decisions about which stories run or which stories get more publicity. And I think it's just really finding people or producers with empathy who really want to shed light on everybody, and not someone who has some type of hang up about the community who wants to control what narratives are put out in the news.
I think that's a really interesting point, of course, breaking through. And I didn't really mean to turn this into a conversation about media, but of course, media is an important part because it's actually how so many things get out there in the public. But I'll say to all of you what I say to everybody around, you know, we're now old enough, the four of us are, that we are the adults at the table. Change to happen is actually within our control and our grasp. It's not like we can blame anybody else. The point is we are the adults at the table now. And so we just have to be, you know, smart enough to figure out how to make it happen. And it's a big job, you know, it's a big job, but we only got to look inward to figure out how we can make things happen for other people and realize that there are many obstacles. Resource and access and all those things are obstacles. But, you know, we're adults, you know. And, so Logan, I want to go back to you. Can you imagine doing a report like this in some other part of the country? MAP is focused on the Southeast. What would it be? What would this report look like in the Northeast? What would it look like in the Pacific Northwest or in the total West? What would it look like in the middle of America? Have you thought about if you were to break this up and do it in other parts of the country, what it would look like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, both as a researcher and as a queer person, to think about my own experiences in different parts of the country. Um, I mean, I think that what we tried to do with this report was to look at the South specifically, and as a region, what are elements and histories of the region that make it unique from other parts of the country, and then how do those unique histories and features shape the modern LGBTQ experience in the South, including the policy landscape and how queer and trans Southerners make political change and cultural change in response to those uniquenesses. And so I imagine that if we were to do this report in other parts of in other regions of the country, that we'd probably take a similar lens and think about, you know, what is unique about the Pacific Northwest or the Midwest or the Northeast or the Southwest, and how do those elements of the history and geography and populations in each of those regions shape contemporary experiences and politics. And to me, that is exactly why I think one of the many reasons that I think this report, and in particular the work of queer and trans Southerners, can offer so much to queer and trans and other communities all across the country, even if they're not in the South. Because if you're able to sort of bring that analysis of like, well, what's unique about my region or my state or my town, and how does that shape where we are today? How can you then leverage that that unique history or those unique features of where you are, not trying to overcome those things, but work with them to create change. And I think that's a lot of what we see queer and trans Southerners trying to do.
Ivy?
Yeah, I would would really just echo everything that Logan just said. I really don't know that I actually have anything else of value to add to that. I think that he really hit the nail on the head there.
Great, great. Okay, well, folks, we're coming to the end of our hour, and this has been sort of an astonishing conversation. I think, like I said, where's Rachel? You know, I want someone to be here. You know, where's Terry Gross? I want someone who actually has a much bigger megaphone to have a conversation about this. Because I think it's you know, it transcends so many other things that are going on right now. And I think it's incredibly powerful. And the work that you guys are doing is really just, all I can do is say thank you, thank you, thank you for the work that you're doing, because it really does benefit all of us. Last quick question. I'm getting the high sign here. We only have 2 minutes left. And so last quick question. This is your final round, your final Jeopardy round here. So without getting too political, but yet let's be honest about it. What plans do you have for next Wednesday morning? Think about that for a moment. Next Wednesday morning, you're going to get some news when you wake up that day, and it's going to be something you really like. It's going to be something you don't like, or you're not going to have an answer.
I can jump in on this first. And I mean, I think here's what I would say about that. Regardless of what the outcome of this election is, queer and trans people have been in the South. We've been operating in political climates that are designed to oppress us for years and years and years. And we've continued to show up and thrive and support each other. So regardless of what happens, you know, of course, there's an outcome I'd rather have, obviously. But regardless of what happens, we're going to still be here. We're still going to have each other. We're going to keep going.
I would say we endured the last 4. We were resilient. We were trailblazing, and we made it through. And we will make it through another 4 years, and then I will take the day off and pour me several big glasses of Hennessy and Coke.
Logan?
Yeah, similarly, I think one of the many things, as I've said, that we can learn from our friends and family in the South is that there's many, many, many ways to make change, including outside of the halls of government. So no matter who wins this election at the presidential level and any level down the ticket, um, there's always work to be done and work that we can do. And a lot of that work starts and ends with taking care of each other. So I will be turning my attention on Wednesday and each day after that to continuing to show up for my community.
That's great. Well, thank you all. Zakia, Ivy, and Logan, it's been great to see you all. This hour went by so fast. A great report, and thank you for all the wonderful work, Zakia and Ivy, that you've done. If there's any way those of us at Stonewall can help in any way with the work that you're doing, please, please, please reach out to us at any time. Emery Grant, are you there? He's here behind the screen. Yes. Reach out to either me or Emery Grant through stonewall-museum.org. And thank you for all the great work that you do, folks. And everybody else, we'll see you all next week. Hope to see you guys. Get onto our Facebook, onto our website, and then join up for our newsletter, and you can get to see the other people who are there. But just to the three of you, thank you so much for all the great work that you do.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye, guys. Have a good night.
Take care.